three wise women would have asked for directions, arrived on time, helped deliver the baby, made a casserole, brought practical gifts, and there would be peace on earth. My apologies for the stereotyping and sexist language of that. I use it to point to the fact that of all the characters in these nativity stories, it seems like the three magi stimulate the imagination like none others. So much so that the early Christian art showed the magi, but it was almost 3 centuries before they started depicting the shepherds, which is what we usually have heard in the story. And I also tell you that because it seems like the whole story isn't covered, that there's some holes in it, that perhaps there are questions that we need to ask that we haven't been asking. People have had various takes on this. You'll notice in your introduction this morning, in your bulletin, in the, what do we call it, entering in, is a quote from Evelyn Waugh's book called, what was her book called? You don't know either. You're young enough not to know. I'm old enough that it just drifts away. Helena is her name. Helena was Constantine's mother in the 3rd century. And Helena came late to Christianity, and she began the spiritual pilgrimage, and one of the places she went first was to Jerusalem, and she went there to find the true cross, which legend has it she did find in a cave underneath Golgotha, and to this day, that place is the place of the Holy Sepulchre, which she had her husband build. But she also went looking for the Magi. And legend has it that she found the remains of the Magi somewhere off in Persia, where they had ostensibly gone by legend. And she brought the bones back to Constantinople, which is where they were for many years, and then through some political whatever goes on with the church and the Roman state, they ended up in Milan, and through even more intrigue, they finally ended up in Cologne, which is where they are today. I never thought much about them because I thought it was a fanciful tale, which it may be, other than people have gone to Cologne to worship at that shrine for centuries, ever since the Middle Ages. And I had the opportunity to go to Cologne a couple years ago and was shocked by what I saw. I mean, I expected to find some graves marked for where the relics were, but when you walk into Cologne Cathedral, you see this triple sarcophagus sitting behind the high altar in gold and silver and covered with jewels. It's a magnificent sight. An interesting side note, if you look at your bulletin this morning, you'll see a picture from the 12th century of the Magi on their way, and you'll notice that one of them is a young man, and one of them is a middle-aged man, and the other one is an old man. Well, that legend has persisted for centuries, and back in the 1920s, when they were doing some restoration work in the cathedral, and they decided to open the 3 sarcophagi, and they discovered there the bones of a young man, the bones of a middle-aged man, and the bones of an old man. So somehow, somebody learned that legend before they put the bones in there, and there it is. It is probably the most visited shrine in all of Christendom, in Europe at least. Anyhow, there is something magical about these 3 wise men. We get shepherds in the first story, from Luke, and everybody's seen a shepherd, so that's not a big deal. But these magi are kind of magical. And they show up all over the place. First of all, they show up and then they disappear. And then if you watch the movies, one of them shows up at the crucifixion in Ben-Hur. Remember Ben-Hur? And then Menotti writes an operetta in which the Magi show up to Amal, who is a crippled boy, and he's cured. Anyhow, the Magi show up in very different places. But there's something interesting about the Magi that we miss because we usually miss the rest of the story. And the rest of the story goes something like this. Jesus is born in Bethlehem of Judea. The angel told Joseph that. This is Matthew. And then the Magi come, probably 2 years later. And then Herod, who didn't like what he heard, gets angry because the Magi don't come back to him like he told them. And so he decides to kill all the baby boys up to 2 years old in Bethlehem. That feast is celebrated on the 28th of December, and we usually miss it. It's called the Feast of the Holy Innocents. The Magi were told in a dream to go back another way. Joseph is told in a dream, get out of town. And so that's the next part of the story. Jesus and Joseph and Mary take Jesus and go to Egypt. They become refugees, so to speak. And there they wait until King Herod dies. And then they're also told not to go back to Bethlehem because it's probably still too dangerous to go there. So they go to Nazareth, where again, for Joseph's family, they are refugees. So that's kind of the story. And if we miss those parts of the story, we kind of miss the deeper truth about Christianity. And that is that it is not all rosy and red. That it's not all joyful angels singing. That this baby who comes into the world brings with it not only cute and cuddly, but turns the world upside down and brings pain to people who don't deserve it. So, another woman writes another poem about the Magi, and she writes, "We call them wise, and I had always thought of them that way, respecting the pilgrimage of anyone who sees a star and follows it to his own or her own discomfiting, being prepared to change. And yet, in following their star, the star that was to lead them to enlargement of their own souls, they blundered mightily and set in train the massacre of many innocents. Naive and foolish men they were, not wise, to go and ask Herod, 'Where is your rival? Where is he who might unseat you?' I wonder if back in their own countries, for all they themselves were born again, they heard the voice of Rachel weeping for her children, refusing to be comforted because they were no more." That's the hole that we miss in the story. The story of people on their journey forgetting that there are other people around them, so to speak. And I think that's important for us to remember, that our personal journeys are anything but personal. While we all need to go on them, just like the Magi had to follow that star, we need to be sure that we don't hurt people along the way. So, what we come to, I think, is what T.S. Eliot wrote in his Journey of the Magi. He wrote, one of the Magi, reflecting on their trip, "We were led all that way for birth or death." There was birth, certainly. We had evidence, and no doubt I had seen birth and death, but had thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. We returned to our palaces, these kingdoms, but no longer here in the old dispensation with an alien people clutching their gods. I should be glad of another death. Helena, in Evelyn Waugh's book, says that she has named the wise men her patron saints because, like them, they came late. And like them, she said, they were the learned, the oblique, and the delicate. And yet their gifts were accepted, just as all of our gifts are always accepted when they're brought to the table, to the place of grace and holiness, peace, life, birth, death, and new life. Amen.